the Festival of Hathor, Dendera, 1450 BC. The night air trembled with music, the smell of blue lotus, honey wine, and burning frankincense floated above the city of Dendera like a spell. The people danced by torchlight. They sang the name of Hathor, goddess of beauty and love, mother of all joy, all birth, all desire. Every drumbeat shook the streets. Every clap of hand echoed against the great limestone walls of the temple. It was the festival of renewal, when the Nile goddess was said to wake again, to bless the wombs of women and to make the soil rich for the year to come. But behind the laughter and gold, the temple hid another world, a world that no song ever mentioned, a world that even the priests whispered about only when the lamps were out. Inside the temple, the torches flickered low. The stone corridors smelled of oil and salt. Far from the noise of the crowd, down a hallway painted with sacred animals and stars, a small chamber waited. In that chamber stood a girl. Naya, she was 14, maybe younger. Her hair was dark and oiled, tied with a thin ribbon of gold. Her skin glowed from the mixture of oil and dust rubbed on her by attendants. She wore only a light linen cloth around her waist. Her chest was bare. The air felt cold against her skin. Outside, she could still hear the drums. Boom, boom, boom. Each beat reminded her that the world was alive, celebrating, feasting. But in this silent room, she felt completely alone. Her hands trembled. Her heart raced so fast she could hear it in her ears. She could taste the fear, dry, metallic, sharp like sand on her tongue. Then the great bronze door creaked open. A tall man entered, the high priest of Hathor. His robe shimmered with golden threads. His neck was heavy with blue stones. In his hand he held a small jar of sacred oil. Behind him came two attendants, their heads shaved, their faces calm as stone. The priest looked at her, not as a man looks at a child, but as if she were a thing made of ritual and command. He raised his hands slowly. "Tonight," he said, his voice deep and slow, "you are not a child. You are not flesh. You are Hathor." The words froze her breath. The attendants knelt. One of them began to hum, a low vibrating sound that filled the chamber. The other lifted the jar of oil, pouring a few drops into the priest's palm. The priest stepped closer. His eyes did not blink. His shadow covered her feet. "What happens here," he continued softly, "is not sin. It is the most sacred act, the act that keeps Egypt alive." Naya felt her throat tighten. She wanted to ask why her, but her voice was gone. The oil's scent, sweet, heavy, filled her nose, made her dizzy. Her knees weakened. Outside, the festival still raged. Drums, flutes, laughter, chants. Inside, everything slowed, like time itself was holding its breath. The priest dipped his fingers in the oil and touched her forehead. The cold liquid slid down between her eyes. "The goddess enters flesh," he whispered. "Through you, the land will be fed." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she was chosen for something holy. But deep down, she felt a quiet scream rising, one she could not release. Her eyes darted to the far side of the chamber. There, a second bronze door waited, smaller, darker, carved with serpents and suns. She had seen that door before. From afar, she had seen other girls led. Through it, all was in silence. None of them had ever come. Back, the chanting grew louder. The air thickened with the smell of burning resin. The priest nodded to his attendants. One of them pressed a small clay cup to Naya's lips. The liquid burned her tongue, bitter and strange. She swallowed because she was told to. Her body grew warm. Her vision shimmered. The walls seemed to breathe. The priest's voice became a blur, words melting together. Oil dripped onto her shoulders. Hands guided her toward the dark door. Her bare feet left faint prints on the cold stone floor. The bronze door opened with a deep groan. Steps led downward. The air below was cooler, damp, ancient, filled with the scent of dust and earth. A faint hum came from below, the sound of more voices. Chanting slowly in circles, her body shook. She looked back, but the priest's hand pressed gently against her back. "Do not fear, child," he said. "You are becoming the goddess. Through you, Egypt will be eternal." And she walked down. The light faded as she descended. Each torch on the wall burned weaker, smaller, until the corridor opened into a vast stone chamber deep beneath the temple. The walls were carved with images of women and stars. Oil lamps burned on the floor, casting strange shapes. Around the room stood figures in golden masks. None spoke, none moved. They only watched. Naya stood in the center. Shaking, her heart pounded like a drum. The air buzzed with the low hum of chanting. A drop of oil fell from her hair to the floor. Plop! The echo filled the chamber like thunder. One of the masked figures stepped forward. He carried a staff, topped with a small figure of Hathor. He raised it high and said, "The goddess has come among us." The others repeated softly, "The goddess has come among us." The torches flickered blue. The air trembled. Naya closed her eyes. She could still hear the festival far above, faint, distant. The music, the joy, the laughter of people who would never know what happened here. Her lips parted to pray, but no sound came out. And then the torches dimmed. Darkness, breathing, whispers. Something moved toward her, and just before she could see, the sound stopped. The screen fades to black, a pause, silence. Then a voice. Calm, low, heavy with warning. But before I tell you exactly what happened in that sealed chamber, I need to show you the system that made it all possible. The rules, the beliefs, the lies that allowed Egypt's most sacred temple to become a place of hidden rituals and fear. Before we return to Naya in that sealed chamber, you need to understand why this happened. Why the Temple of Hathor, once a place of beauty and music, became a prison of silence. How an entire system of belief allowed the powerful to do anything and still call it holy. In ancient Egypt, religion was not just faith. It was law. It ruled the Nile, the harvest, and the people. Every drop of water, every birth, every breath was said to belong to the gods, and no god was more loved or more feared than Hathor, the goddess of love, the mother of creation, the mirror of heaven. But behind the golden mask of kindness, there was another face, the face of control. The priests taught that Hathor's joy kept the world alive. If the goddess was pleased, the Nile would flood, the crops would grow, and life would continue. If she was angered, famine would come. So, to keep her happy, the priests claimed they had to become one with her. That meant rituals of union, sacred acts of fertility performed not for desire, they said, but for divine balance. It sounded holy. It sounded pure. But over centuries, it became something darker. The temple's inner circle began to see themselves not as servants of the goddess, but as her chosen equals. They believed that Hathor spoke through them, that their touch, their power, their bodies were divine, and if they were divine, then there was no sin, no crime, no limit to what they could do. At the top of this system sat the high priest of Hathor, a man chosen from royal bloodlines. Below him were the lectors, who memorized ancient hymns and controlled temple records. Then came the scribes, who wrote everything, every ritual, every offering, every divine act. And beneath them were the temple maidens, young girls trained to dance, sing, and serve as the living breath of the goddess. To outsiders, it looked beautiful. The temple glittered with gold. The songs were soft and slow. Pilgrims came from across Egypt offering jewelry and grain. They believed their gifts would please Hathor and bless their families. But inside the temple walls, another truth lived, hidden in coded words and rituals too secret to write. Every priestess took an oath before her first ritual. She swore to silence, to speak no word of what happened below the ground. If she broke that oath, she would be declared unclean of voice. To be unclean meant to lose your name, your food, your home, and even your burial. No one would touch you. No one would speak your name after death. So silence became survival. And silence kept the system alive. Even the pharaohs rarely interfered. The temples were too powerful, too rich, too important. And the high priests often controlled knowledge that kings themselves feared. Ancient prophecies, secret medicines, forbidden books of the afterlife. So, the priests became untouchable. They were above human rules. They claimed, "We do not act for pleasure, we act for the balance of the world," and the people believed them. Because who could question a man who spoke for the gods? Records found centuries later, fragments of writings by a royal scribe named Amun, tell us about what truly happened below the temple. Amun was not a priest. He was an observer, a recorder. His words, written in ink made from soot and pomegranate bark, described chambers below the temple where no sun touched the floor. He spoke of 200 maidens of Hathor, chosen by the priests, never seen again by the light of Ra, 200 lives. 200 names erased. He described the ceremonies, the offerings of oil, the chants, the so-called unions of gods and goddesses. He wrote that each girl was told she would become the mother of divine life. But to Amen, it was clear this was not holiness. It was control turned sacred by words and gold. Amen's writings were hidden, sealed behind clay walls, and for 3 decades no one dared to open them until a man named Manbi, a senior scribe loyal to Pharaoh Thutmose III, found them. When he read Amen's account, he trembled. He saw what power had done, how belief had become a mask for violation. He knew what it meant. If this truth ever reached the Pharaoh, the temple's power could crumble. But secrets in Egypt did not die easily. Why did the people not see it? Why did no one stop it? Because in ancient Egypt, fear was wrapped in beauty. Every ritual looked divine. Golden cups, soft music, dancers moving like sunlight on water. It all looked pure, but purity was only the paint. Underneath, the system was built on obedience. They taught that questioning the priests was the same as questioning Hathor herself. And to question the goddess meant death of the soul. No afterlife, no eternity in the field of reeds. So people bowed. They smiled. They worshipped. And they looked away. The priests kept their power through symbols, oil, music, and myth. Each object had meaning. The lotus flower for rebirth, the mirror for reflection of the goddess, the milk for purity. But those meanings were twisted. What was once symbolic became literal. The priest's hand became the hand of the god. The girl became the vessel of life. And together, in the darkness below, the ritual became the act that kept Egypt's divine order alive. That is what they said. That is what they wrote. But Amen saw the truth. He called it quietly in his hidden scrolls, the feeding of power, he wrote. The goddess does not come down to touch the earth. It is man who claims her name to feed his hunger. And so the people kept praying. The priests kept ruling. And every year the temple's doors opened to the festival. Music above, silence below. Subscribe now. This story will change how you see history. Comment what you think you know. Watch till the end for the real names, the proof, and the judgment that followed, because now the system has been revealed. And in the next part, we will see how young girls like Naya were trained, prepared, and transformed, step by step, into living offerings for gods they never truly met. Before Naya stood in that dark chamber, before the oil touched her skin, before she was told she would become the goddess, there was a long road that led her there, and that road began the day she was chosen. Every year, when the festival of Hathor ended, the priests sent messengers through the villages. They looked for girls between the ages of 8 and 10. They had to be healthy, beautiful, unmarried. Their skin had to be smooth, their eyes bright, their voices soft. They called it an honor to be chosen for the temple. Parents wept with pride when their daughters were taken. They believed the girls would live among music and silk, singing praises to the goddess herself. The truth was different. Once a girl entered the temple gates, her old life vanished. Her name was rewritten in temple records. Her family could never visit without permission, and soon the songs she learned were not about joy, but obedience. The first years were peaceful, almost beautiful. The girls were taught to dance, to sing, to play the sistrum, a bronze rattle said to awaken the goddess. They learned to walk without sound, to speak only when asked, to smile even when afraid. They learned the language of eyes and hands, how to bow, how to touch, how to move in rhythm with chants. Every morning began with oil. The attendants rubbed their bodies with perfumed unguents, almond, myrrh, lotus. Their skin gleamed under the torchlight. They were told, "You are preparing for divinity." At night, they learned herbs: lotus for calm, mandrake for sleep, poppy for dreams. Sometimes the girls giggled together, whispering secrets under their linen sheets. They believed the priests would marry them one day, or that they would see the goddess herself. But as years passed, the laughter faded. Older girls disappeared quietly. New ones arrived, and no one spoke of where the older ones went. The teachers repeated the same words every day: "You are not your own. You belong to Hathor. The goddess lives through you." To resist is to deny life itself. These words sank into the girls' minds like stones into the Nile. They stopped asking questions. They stopped dreaming of home. Once a month, the high priest would walk among them. He would inspect each girl, her posture, her skin, her eyes. He would smile and say, "Perfect." And when he said that word, it felt like the sun itself had chosen them. But no one understood what perfection meant. Not yet. When a girl reached her 12th or 13th year, she was called Daughter of the Mirror. It meant she was ready to serve the goddess in the sacred rites. The temple women gathered her in the inner courtyard. They combed her hair with golden teeth. They washed her body with Nile water mixed with milk and honey. They painted her eyes with malachite, green like the river reeds. Then they placed a small silver mirror in her hand. "Look," they told her. "Do you see the goddess inside you?" The girl would nod, even if her eyes filled with fear, because to say no was to shame Hathor herself. And to shame the goddess was to lose everything: food, warmth, even her burial in the afterlife. That night, each new daughter was given a cup of blue lotus wine, a drink that made the world shimmer and bend. The drums beat slowly. The air smelled of rose and smoke. The priestesses danced around her, chanting. The girl felt light. Her body no longer her own. The chants wrapped around her like water. And for a moment she believed, truly believed, that she was becoming divine. That moment of belief was all the temple needed, because belief was the lock, and obedience was the key. In the next months, the daughters were taught how to receive the goddess. Their teachers spoke softly with calm smiles. They explained gestures, breathing, how to move during sacred union rituals. They said, "This is how the gods renew the world," but they never explained what it meant. They never said who the god really was. To the girls, it was mystery. To the priests, it was preparation. The night of initiation came without warning. No one told the girls the date. One evening, a servant would appear and whisper their name. "Come," he would say, and she would follow barefoot through halls lit by 100 torches. Other girls would watch silently as she disappeared down the corridor. Some prayed for her. Some looked away. Before entering the chamber, the chosen one was bathed again. Her hair was perfumed, her lips touched with wine. The attendants whispered, "You are the goddess now." She was led to the bronze door, the same door Naya had faced. Behind it waited the high priest, the sacred masks, the oil, the chants. The girl would tremble. She would breathe fast, but she would not resist. Because from the age of 8, she had been told this was sacred, and so she stepped forward. For a short time after initiation, the new goddesses were treated like royalty. They were given fine linen, jewelry. They sat near the high priest during festivals. People bowed to them in the courtyard, but their glory was brief. After 1 or 2 seasons, the new girls arrived. The older ones were moved deeper into the temple. Some became attendants. Others were sent to serve in silence. No one saw them again. Whispers said they were taken below to the underground chambers, the wombs of the goddess as the priests called them. Once inside, they were never seen again. The cycle repeated for 30 years. 200 girls entered the temple of Hathor. 200 disappeared, and yet every year the festival continued, bright, joyful, filled with songs about love and birth. The people danced above ground, while beneath their feet silence swallowed the truth. The temple called it honor. The people called it faith. But history would one day call it what it truly was: a system of sacrifice hidden behind the mask of beauty. Before we return to Naya's fate, we must see the other side. the ones who ruled this system, the men and women who wrapped themselves in gold and divine words and called their power sacred duty. The truth about the Temple of Hathor did not end with the girls. It reached higher, to marble halls, to golden thrones, to the men who ruled the kingdom of the Nile, because in Egypt, faith and power were one and the same. And when the priests called something divine, even the Pharaoh bowed. During the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose III, Egypt was rich, vast, and full of pride. Its borders stretched from the deserts of Nubia to the mountains of Canaan. Every victory, every conquest, was said to be blessed by Hathor, the goddess of joy and life. The Pharaoh visited Dendera once each year. He came not as a man, but as a living god, the son of Ra. He wore a crown of gold, his skin shining with oils, his eyes painted black. When he entered the temple of Hathor, the people knelt. Drums rolled like thunder. The priests chanted his name, Thutmose, the beloved of Hathor, the seed of the sun. The high priest, Nebra, walked beside him, a tall man with calm eyes and a smile that never reached them. Nebra's power inside Egypt was second only to the pharaoh's. Some whispered that even the pharaoh feared him, because Nebra knew every secret, from the tombs of the dead to the chambers of the living. Once each decade, the Temple of Hathor hosted a night called the Union of Heaven and Earth. It was said to renew the divine balance between gods and men. The whole city celebrated, the air filled with the scent of lotus and burning resin. But inside the temple, the festival changed. After the public feast ended, the doors closed. Torches burned blue. Music softened into low, steady drums. Only the highest nobles, generals, and chosen priests remained inside. They wore masks of gold and silver, no faces, no names, only servants of the goddess. Behind those masks, anything was allowed. Wine flowed like rivers, laughter mixed with chanting, and in the center of the room, the daughters of Hathor danced, their eyes half closed, their bodies moving like waves. They were called the living stars. The priests said their movements mirrored the journey of the heavens. But for the men who watched, it was more than a dance. It was power made flesh. Nebra raised his staff, his voice slow, echoing off the painted walls. Through this act, he said, the god and goddess meet. The world is renewed. The Nile will rise. Egypt will prosper. He looked toward the pharaoh. Thutmose nodded, his expression unreadable. And so the ritual began. Each noble, each priest took part in the name of divine union. They called it holy. They called it sacred. But the truth was simpler. It was pleasure painted as worship. They believed their touch carried divine energy. They said the goddess entered through them, and the girls were blessed to receive it. And when it was over, the priest would whisper, "Balance has been restored." The pharaoh would leave the temple smiling, believing Egypt was safe for another decade. When dawn came, the temple gates opened again. The city cheered. The priests poured milk and honey into the river as an offering to Hathor. To the people, it looked pure and holy. They never saw what happened in the underground chambers below. After every festival, new girls disappeared, and among the nobles, no one questioned it. They told themselves the maidens had joined the goddess in spirit. Gold, wine, and faith hid the truth, but one man did not look away. Amab, the senior scribe who had found Amun's hidden writings, began to suspect the worst. He had stood near the pharaoh during one of these festivals. He had seen the blue-masked priests lead the girls below the temple after the drums faded. And he had seen the same priests return hours later, silent, trembling, their hands still shining with oil. That night, Amam wrote in his secret tablet, "They call it divine, but the air smells of fear. The goddess is weeping and no one hears her." He knew that to speak such words aloud would mean death. But the truth burned in him like desert fire. The high priest Nebra had no equal. He commanded hundreds of acolytes, owned ships filled with incense and gold, and even controlled the calendars, deciding when the Nile would be declared blessed. Without his word, the pharaoh's offerings to the gods could not be performed. He used this power to silence every question. When rumors spread among lower priests about the missing girls, Nebra summoned them one by one. Some returned pale and silent. Others were never seen again. He told the Pharaoh, "These are lies of jealous men who do not understand the ways of the goddess." And the Pharaoh believed him, because to question the temple was to question the divine order itself. While the lower people worked the fields, the elites lived inside painted halls. Their walls glittered with gold leaf. Perfume burned in every corner. They ate figs dipped in honey and drank wine cooled in jars from the north. In these rooms, the goddess was always near. In statues, mirrors, songs. The nobles told each other stories about how the goddess once loved a mortal king. They said, "When we touch the maidens, we become that king." They laughed. They celebrated. And they called it faith. But even among the powerful, cracks began to show. Some nobles confessed privately to Amanbi that they could not sleep. They said they saw faces in their dreams, the faces of girls they had seen once, dancing in the temple, then never again. One noble said, "Their eyes follow me even in daylight." Amab wrote, "When the powerful begin to fear their own pleasures, the gods are near." He began to plan an investigation to gather proof that the temple had turned sacred rites into secret abuse. But Nebra learned of it. And Nebra did not forgive. One night, Amanbi found a piece of papyrus on his desk. It carried no seal, only one sentence. The goddess protects her secrets. He understood what it meant. He knew his time was short, but before he disappeared, he sent a copy of Amon's writings to a hidden tomb near Thebes, sealed under layers of clay and sand. That tomb would remain closed for thousands of years. The elites called it duty. The priests called it faith. The Pharaoh called it divine will. But to the silent girls, it was hunger. The hunger of men who had learned to use holiness as a shield. Above ground, Egypt shone with temples, music, and glory. Below ground, the darkness kept growing, and the high priest smiled, believing no one would ever uncover his secret. The system was perfect, for now. But power built on silence never lasts forever, because silence has a weight, and one day it cracks the stone that holds it. In the next part, you'll see what that power looked like from the inside, the luxury, the seduction, the beauty that blinded everyone to the truth, the gold, the wine, the endless pleasure, and the slow fall that followed. When people today think of ancient Egypt, they imagine golden tombs, shining pyramids, and music played by harps beside the Nile. But what they rarely imagine is what went on behind those polished walls. Inside the chambers of the powerful, the air was thick with perfume, desire, and secrets. This is where the gods were supposed to live among men. But in truth, it was where men became gods in their own minds. By the time Amon's records were buried, Egypt had reached its peak. Wealth from far lands poured in, ivory spices, lapis lazuli, gold beyond measure. The nobles built villas on the riverbanks, with private gardens full of palm trees and fountains that whispered even at midnight. Every surface shone. Even the floors were painted with images of lotus flowers floating on water, so that when the nobles walked, it seemed as if they walked on the Nile itself. Slaves fanned them with ostrich feathers. Servants anointed their skin with sacred oils, frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and rare blossoms, brought from lands so far that even the servants didn't know their names. Every morning began with ritual. Every night ended with pleasure, but between those two, power moved like smoke. Inside the royal court, access meant everything. The closer you were to the pharaoh, the closer you were to godhood itself. The high priest Nebra understood this better than anyone. He hosted feasts in the temple's golden hall, where the air shimmered from the heat of 1,000 oil lamps. The guests arrived dressed in linen thin as mist. Jewels glittered on their necks. Musicians played soft rhythms that sounded like heartbeats. The nobles laughed, drank, and whispered. But under the laughter was something else, a hunger that had no end. Each man wanted more favor. Each woman wanted more power. They smiled at each other, but their eyes watched for weakness. And when Nebra spoke, the room fell silent. "The goddess sees all," he said softly. "Those who serve her faithfully will never want." His smile was calm, But his meaning was clear. To stay powerful, one had to stay close to him, to the temple, and to its secrets. The priestesses chosen for the temple service were not just dancers or singers. They were trained to control the hearts of the mighty. They knew how to move, how to breathe, how to look at a man until he felt divine. To the nobles, they were not women. They were miracles, living proof that Hathor herself walked the earth. And so, the temple became more than a place of worship. It became a stage, a theater where beauty and power met in a dance no one dared question. Every whisper of silk, every flicker of torchlight, every scent of perfume was designed to seduce not just the body, but the soul. Even within the palace, whispers began to spread. Queen Merisank, the pharaoh's consort, noticed that her husband spent more nights in the temple than in his chambers. She saw the marks of oils on his skin, the same oils used only by the priestesses of Hathor. At first, she said nothing. But one night, she followed him, disguised under a dark cloak. She stood in the shadow of the great statue of Hathor and saw what no queen should ever see. She watched her husband kneel before Nebra as the priest whispered words that were not prayers, but commands. She saw the dancers, their faces painted gold, their eyes half closed, move around the pharaoh like spirits, and she saw him give himself to the ritual as if he were no longer pharaoh, but a slave to the goddess. She returned to her chambers, trembling, whispering, "Even kings are prisoners when their gods are made of flesh." Every month, the elite gathered for a secret banquet called the Feast of Seven Cups. Each cup represented a gift from Hathor. Beauty, pleasure, music, fertility, love, madness, and death, they drank in order. With each cup, the air changed. The laughter grew louder, the eyes softer, the truth weaker. By the seventh cup, reason was gone. Masks fell, and the night turned into a storm of silk, shadows, and incense. No one remembered everything that happened there, and perhaps that was the point. Behind the main altar, there was a door only Nebra could open. Inside lay his private sanctuary, a chamber lined with mirrors and gold, where he prayed alone to Hathor. But his prayers were not for Egypt. They were for power eternal. He believed that through the rituals, his spirit would merge with the goddess, that he would never die. He told his closest followers, "The goddess does not choose men of weakness. She chooses those who dare to touch the divine." And they believed him. They knelt. They offered gold, loyalty, and their souls. To them, Nebra was not just a priest. He was a bridge between this world and the next. The line between faith and domination disappeared. Amanb, the royal scribe who had dared to question the temple, managed to speak secretly with one of the younger acolytes. The boy was terrified, shaking, eyes wide with guilt. He told Amanb that in Nebra's chamber there were scrolls sealed with blood, records of every noble who had entered the secret feasts, names, dates, deeds, proof that could destroy them all. Amanb knew then that the temple's power did not come only from faith. It came from blackmail, from fear, from knowledge of sin. The nobles obeyed the temple not because they believed in the goddess, but because they knew the goddess's priests could ruin them. There was one noble named Ptahhotep, a man of great charm and terrible ambition. He rose fast in court because of his closeness to the temple. He was young, beautiful, and confident. Nebra favored him, until one night, Ptahhotep tried to leave the order. He told Nebra, "I no longer feel the goddess. I only feel shame," Nebra smiled. The next morning, Ptahhotep's body was found in the river, his tongue cut out, and lotus petals floating around him. The priest said it was an accident. But Amanb wrote in his final record, "The river does not kill in silence. Men do." After that, no one dared to leave. The elites believed that their pleasures were not sins, but steps toward eternity. They believed that the essence of the goddess entered them through every ritual, that they carried her spirit in their blood. So, when they grew old, they demanded to be buried beside the priestesses who had served them. They said their souls would meet again in the afterlife, and together they would rise as divine beings. But their tombs, when later opened, showed something else. Their mummified faces twisted in fear. as if they saw judgment coming even after death. The temple of Hathor had become untouchable. Its priests ruled through desire, its nobles obeyed through fear, and its king, the most powerful man in the world, bowed to the very ones he thought he commanded. Faith had become theater, pleasure had become control, and the goddess, once the symbol of love, had become the mask of corruption. But power built on pleasure never stays silent for long. Rumors began to grow. The people started whispering. And one night, something happened that shook Egypt to its core, because when lies live too long, even gods start to bleed. The age of glory was ending. The gold still gleamed, the songs still played. But behind the painted walls, Egypt was beginning to decay, not from enemies outside, but from rot within. The people could not see it at first, but they could feel it. The Nile flooded later each year. The air grew heavier, the harvest smaller, and the goddess, the one they had trusted for generations, no longer answered. The priests said everything was fine. They told the people, "Hathor smiles upon you." The delay of the flood is her test, but deep down even the priests stopped believing. Their rituals felt hollow. Their chants echoed without power, and their dreams were haunted. Neb-Ra, the high priest, began to suffer terrible visions. He saw the faces of the girls from the underground chambers, eyes open, silent, staring. Every night he woke, gasping, whispering, "It is only the goddess testing me, only the goddess." But it was not faith anymore. It was guilt. Then came the rumors. They spread like sand in the wind. At first they were only whispers in the markets. Women said the temple took their daughters and never returned them. Men said they had seen wagons at night covered in cloth leaving the temple's lower gates. A mother in Dendera cried in the streets, "My child was taken to serve the goddess." They said she would come home blessed. That was 3 harvests ago. The guards drove her away, but her word stayed. Soon others began to speak. A pattern appeared, and even those who still believed in the goddess started to ask quiet questions. Amamb, the royal scribe, saw his chance. He had gathered more evidence, stolen scrolls, secret accounts, and testimonies from servants. He wrote everything down in a final tablet. It began with these words, "The temple has turned holy life into death." The goddess's name is used to hide the crimes of men. He sealed the tablet inside a clay box and prepared to deliver it to the pharaoh himself. But Neb-Ra found out. That night, the temple of Hathor burned. The flames rose higher than the statue's crown. The smell of smoke and oil filled the sky. People gathered in the streets, crying, praying, shouting. The priests said lightning had struck, but some saw armed guards carrying boxes from the temple's lower chambers before the fire began. And among them, one man was dragged by the wrists. Amanbi, they said he confessed to treason. They said he tried to destroy sacred writings. But the truth? He had tried to save them. Before dawn, Amamb was gone. No one ever found his body. The pharaoh wept publicly, saying, "The goddess punishes those who doubt." But his eyes were hollow. And the people began to wonder, who was punishing whom? After the fire, Pharaoh Thutmose III changed. He rarely spoke. He stopped visiting the temple. He even ordered new shrines built to other gods, as if trying to escape Hathor's gaze. He told his council, "There is too much shadow in her house." But it was too late. Neb-Ra still held power. The nobles still feared him, and the temple's secrets were buried, but not forgotten. The Queen Merisant withdrew from court. Some said she had gone mad, whispering at night to statues of the missing girls. Others said she was poisoned, another offering to keep the secret sealed. The years that followed were strange. The Nile's floods grew weaker. The people began to lose faith. Farmers refused to offer grain to the temples. They said the gods no longer cared. Scribes recorded strange omens, comets, red skies, trembling ground. Some believed the goddess herself was angry. Others believed she had left Egypt forever. The high priest Neb-Ra grew older, his once perfect voice now shaking when he spoke. He began to isolate himself in the temple's rebuilt chambers. He refused food for days, then demanded banquets with golden plates and songs until dawn. His mind was splitting under the weight of his sins. He whispered to his remaining followers, "She is near. The goddess comes to take me home." But the followers who entered his room found something else. When they opened the chamber, Nebra was kneeling before the mirror altar. His face was calm, almost peaceful, but his throat was cut, and beside him lay a dagger covered in dried blue paint, the same paint once used to mark the chosen maidens. On the wall, he had written in his own blood, "I have become the god I worshipped, and the god I made." The priests who found him burned the chamber, sealing the room forever. They said he had joined the goddess, but to the few who still dared to think, it looked like something else: judgment. After Nebra's death, the temple of Hathor fell into quiet decay. The priests who remained fought among themselves. The nobles turned away, pretending they had never known. And the pharaoh, old and weary, ordered a new sanctuary built, one without chambers below. He said, "Let her name be sung again, but not her secrets." Yet no songs could hide what had already happened. Travelers who passed through Dendera spoke of strange sounds at night, low whispers rising from the ground. They said that under the ruins, a door remained sealed with clay and gold, and behind it, something moved. Centuries later, when new rulers rose and fell, the temple was buried in sand. Only fragments survived, walls painted with smiling gods, stories of beauty and love. No one spoke of the girls or the priests or the underground rituals. Until one day, a new scribe, far from Dendera, found a sealed box marked with Amun's name. Inside were copies of the same writings Amunbi had tried to save. They told the story of 200 priestesses who entered the temple's lower halls over 30 years and never came back. The new scribe did not know if it was myth or truth. But as he read, he wrote at the bottom of the page, "If this is a lie, it is a lie too dark to invent. And if it is truth, may the gods forgive us all." Over time, Egypt's new priests blamed the old ways for the kingdom's fall. They said Hathor's cult had grown too hungry, too human, too proud. They erased her darker side from history. They turned her from goddess of blood and birth into a goddess of music and joy. But every smile painted on a temple wall hides another story. Every song hides a silence. And every empire that worships beauty too much ends up feeding on itself. The Temple of Hathor was not destroyed by enemies. It was destroyed by its own perfection, by those who believed their pleasure was divine and their guilt invisible. But guilt has a way of surviving time. Even in the sand, even in gold, the rituals were forgotten, the names erased. But the silence remained, and the silence still speaks if you listen closely, because some truths never die. They wait. In the final part, we return to the beginning, to that terrified young girl standing in the golden chamber, to the question that has haunted every age since. Were they victims or believers? The story began in gold, but it ends in dust. Centuries have passed since the Temple of Hathor stood tall over Dendera, glowing under the desert sun. The walls are gone now, the songs are gone. Even the names of those who lived and died inside are almost forgotten. But one question remains, echoing through time. What truly happened in those underground chambers? Let me take you there again, to that night in 1450 BC, when the festival lights burned and the drums shook the desert air. A young girl, barely 14, stood trembling before the high priest. Her body was oiled with myrrh, her skin smelled of honey and salt. She could hear the chants, the rising rhythm that seemed to pull the world apart. The people outside were laughing, dancing, celebrating the goddess. Inside, the air was heavy and still. Nebra lifted his hands over her head and said the words she would never forget. "Tonight, you are the goddess herself. What happens here is not sin. It is the most sacred act that keeps Egypt alive." The girl's lips trembled. Her heart pounded like the drums outside. And then, the golden doors closed behind her. We never learned her name, but her silence still lives in the sand. For thousands of years, people believed the temple's story was one of joy, music, and fertility. They painted the goddess with smiles. They sang songs of beauty and love, but the truth, the one written by Amun and buried by Amunbi, told something else. It told how beauty became obedience, how faith became control, and how the most sacred word, divine, was used to hide the most human crime. Every ritual had meaning. Every act had a rule. Every drop of gold had a cost, and that cost was human. Look closer at the story of Egypt's elites. The gold they wore, the gods they praised, the temples they built, all of it was a mirror. And in that mirror, they saw not the gods, but themselves. They believed they were chosen. They believed their pleasure was the same as worship. They believed their touch gave life. But what it truly gave was fear, silence, and death. The high priest Nebra said, "We touched the divine." But in truth, the divine was gone, and all that remained was the echo of their hunger. When the fire consumed the temple, it was not just wood and oil that burned. It was faith. The people who once sang to Hathor now whispered her name in fear. They stopped bringing flowers. They stopped lighting lamps. They turned away from the goddess who once promised them joy. And the gods, silent for so long, seemed to turn away too. The Nile grew bitter. The land cracked. And Egypt began to fade, not from war, not from famine, but from its own shadow. You see, history is not just a record of kings and temples. It is a record of what people choose to hide. And Egypt, for all its beauty, hid something dark beneath its gold. They built monuments to hide the memory of 200 priestesses who vanished underground. They painted smiles over pain. They wrote songs to drown out the cries. But the desert does not forget. The desert keeps everything, every whisper, every breath, every prayer. So when archaeologists today dig into the sands of Dendera, they find not just stones. They find questions, and among them a single truth begins to rise again. No empire is sacred when built on silence. When I think of that nameless girl standing in the temple, bare feet cold on the marble, incense burning her throat, the priest's voice echoing like thunder, I wonder what she felt. Did she believe she was truly chosen? Did she believe the goddess had entered her? Or did she simply close her eyes and try not to cry? The people outside danced for her. They thought she was becoming divine. But in that chamber, she was just a child, caught in a ritual of power dressed as faith. She did not know she would become history's ghost. A story told thousands of years later, her voice still unheard. If you look through history, Amares, not just Egypt, but every empire, you will find this same story repeating. A temple, a leader, a belief turned into control, and a crowd too afraid to ask questions. The names change. The gods change. But the pattern remains. It begins with beauty. Then comes obedience. Then silence. And finally, corruption. Because when people start believing that some are divine and others unworthy, when power becomes sacred and suffering becomes invisible, history begins. Its slow fall again. Some say Nebra was punished by the gods. Some say he punished himself, but the truth may be simpler. He looked into the mirror of gold too long and saw not Hathor, but his own face, and finally understood what he had done. That is judgment, not from heaven, not from the underworld, but from the human heart that cannot escape its own truth. As Imam once wrote, the goddess does not punish men. Men punish themselves when they become gods. So what does the Temple of Hathor truly teach us? It teaches that power without compassion becomes destruction, that faith without truth becomes slavery, and that beauty without mercy becomes horror. The gold, the music, the rituals, all of it was meant to honor life. But in the hands of the powerful, it turned into a weapon. Every empire that forgets its humanity builds its own temple of silence. Every ruler who believes himself divine creates his own underworld while still alive. And somewhere, in every age, there is another young girl standing in another chamber, told that what is about to happen is sacred. The Temple of Hathor may be buried, but its story is not ancient, it's eternal. It lives in every system where people are treated as offerings, in every place where power hides behind holiness. In every time someone says, this is not sin or it is divine, the names change, the rituals change, but the silence sounds the same. So when you look at history, when you see gold and marble and words like sacred and holy, Ask yourself, who paid the price? Whose voice was lost in the light? And whose hands wrote the history we are told to believe? Because sometimes what shines brightest hides the deepest shadow. And sometimes the most beautiful temples were built with cries no one ever heard. Remember that girl. Remember Amen, the scribe who told the truth. Remember Amam, who tried to save it. Remember Nebra, who drowned in his own lies. And remember that even the greatest civilizations can fall, not from enemies, but from the corruption they refuse to see. The Temple of Hathor was more than a building. It was a warning whispered through stone, through time, through silence. No ritual, no god, no empire can wash away what is done in darkness. Remember the girl standing in that chamber. Remember her fear, her silence, her faith, because this is how elite corruption works. This is how history repeats itself. Now it's your turn. If you've listened this far, if you've felt the chill of Egypt's forgotten night, then you already know what to do. Comment, victims or believers? Subscribe. This story will change how you see history. Share this with someone who still believes power and holiness are the same, because truth does not die. It only waits for someone brave enough to uncover it.